Are Protestants lied to about the Catholic Church? In this video, I want to take a look at some of the common misconceptions that Christian groups have about one another, and I want to take a really charitable look at how we can move forward as Christian brothers and sisters in unity and not in division. And the first point I want to make is that most people are sincerely seeking truth if they're reading the scriptures and they're praying and they're putting forth effort. I really think most people, Catholic, Protestant, if they're putting forth that effort comes from God, and it's a sign that God has a plan for them. So I really think that we need to be charitable when we're dealing with Protestant brothers and sisters, when we're dealing with Catholics, if you're a Protestant. We need to be as charitable as we can, because the reason that I think the way that I do is because of my perspective, because of the information I have, and because of the way it's been presented to me. That's why I think what I think. And from my point of view, I can truly say that it's obvious that the Catholic faith is the one true faith. From a Protestant perspective, they may say that it's obvious to them that the Catholic Church is a fraud because of the information they have and how it's been presented to them. So whenever we're dealing with our Protestant brothers and sisters, it's good to have a little bit of humility and a little bit of charity and recognize that we're wrestling with questions that are above our pay grade. The struggle of theodicy, of the goodness of God, the mystery of the sacraments, the mystery of the church, and of the reconciliation of God and man, all of these things are incredibly difficult, and we're all wrestling with them and trying to figure them out. And I think most people can have this idea of it's my way or the highway. Because I see things the way I do and because they appear so obvious to me, everyone else must just be crazy if they don't see things my way. That's a very narrow-minded way to look at things, and a very uncharitable and selfish way to look at things. Yes, from my perspective, it's obvious the Catholic Church is the one true faith. It's so obvious. From a Protestant's perspective, the opposite may truly and honestly be the case. I don't blame Protestants for seeking the truth to the best of their ability, and I hope that they don't blame me for doing the same. What I will say is this: every single man, woman, and child on earth, in order to get to heaven, is obligated to do two things. Just two. Including cooperate with God's grace. And these two things are, number one, follow your conscience. If you're a Protestant and you think that the Catholic Mass is a sacrilege and is evil, and that by going to it you would be sinning, and you're honestly convinced of that in your mind, well, to that Protestant, I would say, don't go to the Catholic Mass. You can never do good if you really believe that you're doing something evil. Even if it is the case that the Catholic Mass is a good thing and is pleasing to God, the fact that you are there against your conscience would be an evil thing. So the first thing everyone is obligated to do is follow their conscience to the best of their ability. But that's not all. This is the second point, and this is the key. Every man is obliged not only to follow his conscience, but also to form his conscience. Which means what? Every single day, we need to be striving to learn more about the moral law, to learn more about the faith, to learn more about how we're supposed to live as men and how we're supposed to live as Christians. You have an obligation before God to make sure that you're forming your mind in a way that's pleasing to Him. An obligation. If you're failing to form your conscience and you're failing to form your mind and you're failing to conform the way that you think with the way that God thinks, then your conscience may be messed up. And if your conscience is messed up, then it will tell you that good is bad and bad is good. And that's a recipe for disaster. So what do? As Catholics, as Protestants, as Christians, I think the first and most important thing that we can do is, rather than pointing fingers at other people and claiming that we have the truth and everyone else who doesn't is an idiot, before we do that and make that mistake, we should turn in on ourselves, look at our own failings and shortcomings, and recognize that if we have the truth and if we have God's grace in us, it's simply because He is good and not because we are. We have no right to point fingers at other people or to degrade them or to belittle them or to make them feel separate from us. No, if we have something that our brother or sister doesn't have, it's because God is good and not because we are good. It's because God has stepped down from heaven and chosen to pull us up, and that's why we have grace. So be humble and recognize that the goodness that you have, the wisdom that you have, the knowledge that you have about the Scriptures, the fact that you can see the Scriptures in God's light and somebody else can't, is all entirely God's gift. So don't be puffed up. God resists the proud, especially when they're right. God will not give His grace to somebody who thinks he's better than his brother because of a gift from God. So the message that I would have for Catholics and for Protestants today is do these two things and do them honestly. Take a look at yourself, examine yourself, and see if you're doing these two things well. And if you're not, then humble yourself. And if you are, then proceed with fear and trembling, because that's the advice that the Scriptures give us. The two things that you need to do are, 1, follow your conscience to the best of your ability. And 2, make sure you're forming your conscience in accordance with God's will.